Hey, what's up guys, it's Jess. Welcome back to my channel, and for today's video, I'm going to be telling you all the pros and cons of living at home, in the dorms, or off campus. I have personally had experience living in all three, so my freshman year, for part of it, I lived in the dorms. I lived in Lander Hall at the University of Washington. For the end of my freshman year and the entirety of my sophomore year, I lived at home in Illinois. And for my junior year, I currently live in an off-campus apartment. First, I'm going to be talking about the dorms, and I'm going to be starting with the pros. The first pro is that technically utilities such as water and electricity are free. Whereas if you live off campus, that's going to be an extra fee you have to pay. The next pro about living in the dorms is that, in my opinion, I do think it's a lot safer and more secure. Kind of associated with that is that there's always people around, so if there really is a safety issue, there's probably someone near you that can help, or at least notice that something is happening and can call someone to help. Most of the time. I say that because I know that there have been a few issues on many different campuses across the United States that have had issues with safety in the dorms, but overall, I do think it's a bit more safe to live there as opposed to living out on your own. The next pro about living in the dorms, which I think is the best pro, is that it's definitely more social and easier to make friends. My freshman year, I grew really close with my friend Kaden, who lived across from me, and I wouldn't have met him unless he was my next door neighbor in the dorms. And even though I wasn't as close with a bunch of other people that lived on my floor, I still knew them and pretty much saw them every day, and it was so nice to be able to just kind of connect with them in that little 2 seconds that I see them and wave hi. There's always people walking around the dorms or in the study lounges. There are just so many instances you can run into a bunch of different people that you've never met before. For example, I came back from Husky boxing tryouts and I was in the elevator of Lander Hall, just covered in mud and soaking wet, and then me and this dude had a conversation. He's like, "What did you go through?" And it was just funny that we had that small interaction, and I wouldn't have gotten that interaction if I lived off campus. Now I'm going to be getting into the dorm cons. The first con about living in the dorms is the RA restrictions. RAs are supposed to be there to be a helpful resource to you, and most of the time they are. However, depending on the RA, depending on the school, they might be a little more strict with their rules. For example, there's rules on being too loud, there's rules on cooking, there's rules, on whatever college students do. You guys know what I mean. The next con about living in the dorms, and again, I don't know how much this applies to other schools, but at least at my school, I think they're pretty cramped. I lived in a double, so it wasn't that bad, and the UW dorms are a little bit more spacious than what I've seen from other schools, but still you have 2 feet of space in between your bed and your roommate's bed, and especially if you don't get along with your roommate, that is just such an awkward environment to be in. My boyfriend at the time had a triple, and I cannot imagine living in a triple unless you're really, really close and really good friends with everyone you're rooming with, which most of the time, almost all of the time, that is not the case. The next con about living in the dorms is that there's not really a sense of privacy when you have a roommate. And you also would have to ask to have the room if you wanted to have someone over alone and stuff like that. It's just an annoying hassle that I'm really grateful that I don't have to deal with now living off campus, but if you do live in the dorms, that is something you have to go through, where you have to communicate with your roommate. My cousin Veronica had a horrible roommate experience her freshman year. Getting into my next point, which is you may not have the best relationship with your roommate. They may or may not be random, but you may just have met them through the schools app, and then you meet for the first time on campus. And while everything may seem great online, but then you actually start living together, there are a lot of differences that you may notice. Who knows, maybe you can grow close together and be the best of friends, but most of the time, from my experience and what I've seen other people go through, is that they end up not vibing with their roommate as much as they thought they would. There's a lot more differences in terms of personality, lifestyle, etc. Nothing against my freshman roommate, it's just that I don't think we clicked in the way that we were expecting us to, which may be a similar situation for you guys in case you end up rooming with someone that you're not necessarily close to at first and you don't know how you'd interact with as roommates, and then you basically have the entire year to live together. Sometimes it can be a little bit of a messy situation, and luckily me and my roommate were civil, but I've heard some horror roommate stories where they just hate each other and they live 2 feet away from each other, so not good. The next con about living in the dorm is laundry, and most of the time you're going to have to go down the stairs or take an elevator to get from your dorm room to the laundry room. And this is just a very awkward, uncomfortable experience when you're carrying this huge laundry basket down with you. You know, you're scared about dropping your underwear or dropping a sock somewhere. Another thing is that you have to pay for the laundry each time you use it. Another thing is that you have to wait for the laundry, so you have to go down there, probably go back up to your dorm room, and then go back, go up, and then go back again because there's a whole washing and drying process. Another thing is that, in my opinion, at least the laundry in the HFS is not that good. Personally, I don't think it washed my clothes too well. It definitely didn't get all the Husky boxing tryout stains out, so anyway. The next con about living in the dorms is the food situation. So I am almost positive that if you live in HFS housing, you have to have a dining plan. Personally, I liked having the dining plan my freshman year, but that's only because I somewhat liked the food. There's a lot of cons associated with that though, one being that I ran out of food like a month before I had to leave. So I was rationing my food. I was like, you know what, I don't need to eat lunch today, it's fine, I can just wait till dinner. Personally, I enjoy getting my own groceries. That's another thing. It's really hard to get your own groceries for yourself if you want to cook the items, because if you're living in the dorms, most likely you're gonna have one communal kitchen with one stove, and if someone's already using it, obviously you can't use it. Most of the time it's pretty dirty. It's just not very easy to cook for yourself every single day. It's doable, it's definitely doable. It's just kind of hard to store your groceries in your dorm room. You have like this little tiny fridge and you have a microwave and there's not a lot of room, especially if you're sharing that mini fridge with your roommate. Most of the time only leftovers go in there because what else can fit in there? Which brings me into my next point, is that you can't have certain items like a toaster or a toaster oven, so you're really only set with a microwave, and that is if your roommate lets you have a microwave. I heard one of my friends, like, her roommate didn't want a microwave for some reason. She was like against them. I don't know. Anyway, the next con about living in the dorms is that while it may be social, this could sometimes be an issue if you're trying to sleep and you can hear people right next to you being super loud. There's definitely just a lack of privacy when living in the dorms. I think that is the main overarching con. Now I'm going to get into the pros of living off campus. The first pro, I guess, in this current day and age is that I would think there is somewhat of a less COVID risk. Think about how many people live in the dorms and go in and out every single day, and how many classes they go to every single day, and they all have different paths and you're kind of interacting in the same building. Again, you're not probably face to face with every single person in the dorm room, but I do think you're less likely to be exposed to COVID if you are living out on your own. The next pro is that there's a different sense of freedom when you live out on your own. Personally, I feel more like an adult living here than I did at the dorms. Some people aren't ready for that responsibility yet. I personally was, and I love living here. The next pro is cooking. You can buy your own groceries. You can cook whenever you want. You have the kitchen right there. You can go from room to the kitchen. You don't have to go down 6 floors. The next pro is the laundry, and for my apartment, the laundry is right next to my room, so I just have to walk like 2 feet and then it's there, and I don't have to pay for laundry. Another pro is that there's definitely a greater sense of privacy. Another pro is that you can choose to live by yourself or live with roommates, and most of the time if you're choosing roommates for an off-campus apartment, you're probably going to be friends, or at least you know them better than the situation you may have had in the dorms. Another pro about living off campus, which can also be seen as a con, is that you get to buy all of the furniture yourself. It's mainly a con in the sense that this is going to cost a lot of money. It's not already put together when you move in. It can kind of just be a hassle to get everything to your apartment and set everything up, especially if you're ordering online. You kind of have to put all the desks together and the bed together, and it's a hassle. It's annoying and it takes a really long time. But for me personally, I saw this as a pro because I was able to add so much more of myself into the items that I had, and it was definitely more personalized. So the desk that I have in my apartment is one that I love, as opposed to the one in the dorms wasn't really one that I ever worked at. It was just kind of a place to store things, and I worked on my homework in my bed, which obviously was not effective at all. Another thing that I really like about living off campus, at least for me, is that I have 2 separate rooms. So one is my bedroom where I sleep, and this room that I'm in right now is my office where I do my work during the day. And it's really important, at least for me, to distinguish my sleep, relax time from my work time. Now getting into the cons of living off campus, most of the time you're probably going to have a longer walk to get to school, or you're going to have to commute in other ways, whether that's through a bus or even taking a car. It just takes a little bit longer to get to school, which can be a bit of a hassle if you have a 8:30 class, for example, and have to worry about getting up at the right time and doing your skincare routine at the right time and even having time to eat, all while making it to your 8:30 if you woke up at 8:20. You know what I mean? When I was in the dorms, I woke up at like 8:20 and made it to my 8:30 physics quiz section on time, and it was fine. Whereas I could not pull that off here. I would leave at 8:20 and I would miss the entire quiz section. Another con about living off campus is I personally think it's a lot less safe. Again, this kind of depends where you live. I feel like there's just an extra sense of being unsafe when you live out on your own, especially in the area that I live in. Is not the best, as I've already mentioned in a previous video. The next con about living off campus is that it's a lot less social. It's really hard to make friends. All of the friends I made this year are mostly people that I've already met before. I haven't met a lot of new people this year. That is mainly due to a majority of the classes being online, but even still, going to a few of my classes in person this year, it just wasn't the same as it was freshman year, because I would see these people for 60 minutes or whatever to watch a lecture, and then while some people would stay on campus, I would leave to go back home. So there's just kind of that disconnect that I feel. I don't feel like I have a lot of solid friends at school. The next con is utilities. So as I mentioned, you're probably going to have to pay extra for those. So that includes Wi-Fi. Oh, that's another thing. School offers free Wi-Fi. At home, you have to pay for it, and our Wi-Fi sucks. There's also water, electricity, all of that. The next con about living off campus is the roommate agreement / rental application. It's just a lot of forms you have to fill out, and most of the time there's application fees, which is super annoying. Hi.
Hi.
What are
chair?
Yeah. What the better lighting. What are the pros and cons of living at home?
At home, with your family?
Yes, I'll go first. I would say the pros of living at home is that you do have your family with you, maybe your dog with you. This could be a pro and a con. During my online lectures, it was a con to have Bailey around because she'd always bark and make me take her on a walk during the Zoom lecture. So,
Can I have my chair?
No.
Sheesh.
Another pro about
How white I am.
Okay. Another pro about living at home, at least for me, is that it was much easier to commute to everywhere, really. I had access to a car and I was very familiar with the area, so I was able to go to wherever I wanted to, and it was very convenient. For example, if I wanted to go to a clothing store after class, I can do that easily because I know how to get there, and I can get there within like 5 minutes using a car or something like that.
I'd argue the familiarity with home is like one of the cons. Because me being at home, I got so used to it being a place of like comfort and ease that it became impossible to work hard there. I found myself personally falling asleep or like watching TV or going on my phone on the couch because it's just like habits that were instilled in me by being at home. And unfortunately, as much as I would say I could have gotten over those habits at home, like I could have, but it would be faster just for me to move to a different place.
I definitely agree with that point. I do think by being home, I was a lot less motivated and productive doing my schoolwork. Another con is that if your classes are in person, but you're living from home, you have to go through commuting, which for some people that can be like an hour-long venture. Luckily for me, I lived at home when it was online, so that wasn't really that big of a deal, but it didn't feel like school. I just felt like I was doing busy work.
Driving just became like therapeutic, so it depends on the person. All of this does. I've found that, as much as I do like driving, the cons of being at home are like not worth it. I love my family and it's cool to be with them as a family, but when I have to really focus, it's tough to be around them.
So that is pretty much it for the pros and cons of living at all three places. Now, a common question I get asked is, what's the cheapest option? I personally think that living at home.
Yeah, it is, for sure.
Yeah, living at home is definitely the cheapest option, but the more I thought about it is like, you're spending money on tuition if you can't like learn effectively at home, then it might be like a bigger waste of money.
Yeah, there are some unseen costs in the form of cons that come with living in these places. For example, living in an apartment, maybe you pay $100 more for a beautiful view, a beautiful area. That to me is worth it because the cost is made up in terms of your productivity accumulated over the course of the quarter. Those things are unseen, and it's why a lot of people don't really recognize how valuable a good working environment is.
So I would say if I had to sum it up in terms of just like face value, living at home is the cheapest, living off campus is probably second cheapest, and living in the dorms is probably most expensive. And in terms of which one I would pick now that I've experienced living in all three, definitely off campus by far.
Me too.
I would recommend if you're an incoming freshman, definitely live in the dorms. I don't regret living in the dorms at all, and I don't think living off campus my freshman year would have been any better. So I would recommend living in the dorms at least once in your life and try experience it. I would think freshman year is the best time to do so, and then move off campus or live at home or whatever the case may be. So yeah, that is the end of the video. And if y'all have any more questions with this topic or about UW or anything in general, feel free to leave that in the comment section down below. We're gonna go head to the IMA. So we'll see you guys next time. Bye.